Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host Kilu Nyasha and engineer Stephen Leader. Tonight, my guests are Bob Offer-Westort, coordinating editor of the Streetsheet, San Francisco homeless people's newspaper, and the civil rights organizer for the Coalition on Homelessness. Bob has been involved in homeless community organizing since 2005. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks.
And Tiny, also known as Lisa Gray Garcia, daughter of Dee, single mama of Tiburcio, poverty scholar, co-editor and founder of POBRE magazine, PoorNewsNetwork, member of the Poetas, POBRE, Poets Project, and the welfareQUEENs Project, and author of Criminal of Poverty, Growing Up Homeless in America. Welcome, Tiny.
Thank you.
It's so good to have both of you here. And let's start right off with you, Tiny, talking a little bit about what you do.
Okay. Well, you brought up the book, and the interesting thing is that I actually was houseless with my mom for many years. I was the child of a houseless family. My mom was a poor single mama of color who had gone through the system and was at a certain point unable to keep working, and she became disabled, and we became homeless and the one paycheck away from homelessness reality. And the reason I digress to that is that one of our mottos at PORRE magazine is the revolution begins with I and then becomes we. So we produce media that comes from our I stories as a way of resisting the mythologies about poor folks, folks of color, youth, elders, and incarcerated peoples. And in my case, I was actually criminalized for the act of being houseless in America KKK because it is illegal to be homeless in the U.S. And it's a citable offense. And we were living in our car. And lest we think we live in a classless and raceless society, if you're driving a big RV through America, you're not going to get a ticket for sleeping in your vehicle. But if you're in a hoopty like me and my mom were, in a neighborhood that someone doesn't want you to be in, you will get arrested and cited, and then eventually, oftentimes, like in our case, have your helm, which was our car, taken away from us. And so I ended up in jail. And that led me to an act of what I call revolutionary legal advocacy by Ocean Newman in Berkeley, who broke me out of jail and had my thousands of dollars of fines and community service eventually commuted to a community service assignment, which was to write. I never thought of myself as a writer because I'd been, underground economic strategist, hustler, player, whatever I had to do to survive, me and my mama. But at that point, I was actually given the space to write, and which oftentimes is a privilege for poor folks, even to have that space to think, to take ourselves out of the struggle for half a second, and to be able to put together thoughts. And from that, I was published about a story that happened to me and my mom having our PG&E turned off. And the next thing that happened is I was blessed to meet some amazing scholars in Black studies and La Raza studies and women's studies like Erica Huggins and Angela Davis and Gina Soleil and Velia Garcia. And I started to make the connection between poor folks, poor families, locally and globally, and that our relationship and our connections are very deep and very real. And that started to make me think about ways to overthrow the system that we live in, and how it was so vital that we do it, and how media could be a tool to do that. And that's how we launched PORRE magazine out of nothing. Beg, borrow, and steal by any means necessary.
Right, and it's also online for people.
It is online.
To check out.
People can go online to PoorMagazine.org. We do all kinds of projects like the Poets Project, like welfareQUEENs.
And I've heard you perform, and you guys are great.
Thank you.
You really
Thank
are.
you.
You're terrific.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the thing is, when I put my book out, really what I was trying to do was make the link of the criminalization of all peoples and how that actually happens. How can we, by relating and coalescing the situations of poor youth of color, of migrant peoples, of elders incarcerated, as well as just all incarcerated peoples living in the new form of public housing, i.e. jail, if we're making those linkages, that we can actually, that's another way to resist these things that happen to us.
Right.
So that's what it's about.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And Bob, I want to bring you in, and you're the editor of the Streetsheet, which
right.
I pick up periodically and sporadically, and I think it's good.
Thanks.
By the way, you can hold up a copy if you like, so for people to see it. Hold it up high,
I
so
don't know
people
how high
can
it's
really
high.
see
There
it.
we go.
Yeah. And you're also the civil rights community organizer for the Coalition on Homelessness.
That's
So
right.
will you talk about what that means, what you do?
Sure. So the civil rights work group out of the Coalition on Homelessness is one of the work groups. We are a community organizing modeled organization, which means that we are working on organizing communities of people who don't have housing, which for most of us means our communities, and attempting to change a system which oppresses people who don't have, poor people in general, but people who don't have housing in a very specific way.
Right.
So the civil rights work group focuses specifically on folks who are living outside. We have another group which works inside the shelter system.
Right.
And so what that means is trying to deal with criminalization at the direct points where it happens, which means interactions with the police, which we try to document and get any coverage of wrongdoing.
Right.
And then very specifically in the courtroom, where we do a lot of hooking people up with representation for cases that the public defender's office is not allowed to take.
Right. And I understand there was a cop shooting just not long ago of a panhandler. Will you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, that was early last year. I don't recall the month. It was in the spring. There was a gentleman who was panhandling. Chief Heather Fong drove by, saw him, didn't like where he was panhandling. He wasn't breaking any law. And so she called some officers to get rid of him, and they got rid of him in the most violent manner. They asked him to leave. He ran, and they took that as meaning that they should chase him. So they chased him. They cornered him. The official story is he pulled a knife, but who knows what actually happened. The result is that he was shot
And killed.
killed.
Amazing. But this system, of course, fosters contempt for poor people
Right.
on a
I mean,
regular
there-
basis.
That's a very dramatic example, but there are a lot of far less dramatic and far more banal ways in which the system kills people.
Right. And one of the ways it kills people is people who are hospitalized are just dumped on the street if ill. And actually, I have to say that I was one of those people back in the 70s that was dumped. And fortunately, I didn't have to remain on the street. I had people who took me in, but it's horrible what